For years, Princess Charlene and Prince Albert of Monaco have projected the image of a flawless royal couple. Through glamorous appearances, coordinated outfits, and practiced smiles, they've crafted what looks like a picture-perfect monarchy. But behind the grand palace doors, the reality tells a much darker, more complicated story, one of quiet despair, failed escape attempts, and emotional distance. Their marriage, far from the fairy tale it appeared to be, has raised difficult questions. Did Charlene ever truly want this life? And how much longer can she keep playing a role that never fit? As we pull back the curtain, a very different narrative begins to emerge, one that reveals the deeply controversial reality of Princess Charlene's union with Prince Albert. At first glance, their relationship seemed like a match made in heaven. Monaco's dashing prince and the elegant, soft-spoken Charlene appeared to be living a fairy tale in one of the world's most glamorous cities. The stunning wedding, the public affection, the high society events, it all seemed too perfect to question. But for those paying closer attention, something was always slightly off. The smiles didn't quite reach their eyes, the warmth between them often felt forced, and the silences lingered louder than any royal statement. For Charlene, this was no Cinderella story. It was a life that looked enchanted on the outside, yet often felt like a gilded prison. Over time, she sent subtle signals, through her absences, her body language, and in rare, carefully chosen words. When asked if she was happy, she didn't proclaim joy. Instead, she quietly said she had found a certain peace of mind. That single line shifted everything. Charlene's journey began like something out of a dream. Born Charlene Wittstock, she was a South African swimmer with Olympic aspirations and a natural elegance. She met Prince Albert in 2000 at a swimming event, and from that moment, their paths continued to intersect. The media buzzed with excitement. Was she finally the one to win the elusive prince's heart? Their union seemed destined, he, a royal with a prestigious legacy, she, a composed and graceful athlete. But even from the beginning, their relationship was less about love and more about appearances. The spotlight wasn't just on their love story, it was on the royal image Charlene was expected to uphold. Soon after, comparisons to Grace Kelly began. Charlene, tall and poised, was quickly labeled as the next Grace, the American film star who became Monaco's beloved princess. Like Grace, Charlene had left behind a familiar world to join Monaco's monarchy. But where Grace became an enduring symbol of glamour and romanticized royalty, Charlene was stepping into a legacy heavy with expectations. Being likened to Grace Kelly wasn't just a compliment, it was a crushing standard, an impossible legacy to embody. When the couple announced their engagement in 2010, the world celebrated. The palace was glowing, and headlines declared the beginning of a modern royal fairy tale. But even then, doubts lingered. Charlene often appeared somber and distant. Her smiles were measured. Her presence felt controlled. And behind the scenes, rumors of unease began to surface. Whispers of escape attempts soon followed, not once, but 3 times. Reports claimed Charlene tried to flee Monaco before the wedding, once in Paris, again during the Monaco Grand Prix, and once more just days before the ceremony. Each time, she was allegedly stopped, whether by persuasion, pressure, or prevention was never confirmed. But the fact remains, a bride reportedly tried to run away 3 times before saying "I do." That alone spoke volumes, louder than any polished royal photo ever could. Despite the turmoil, the wedding went ahead. The 3-day celebration was lavish, filled with luxury gowns, high-profile guests, and grand performances. But amid the spectacle, something was deeply wrong. Cameras caught Charlene crying, but not with joy. Her tears were quiet and sorrowful. Wearing one of the most exquisite wedding gowns ever made, she stood beside her new husband looking more like a prisoner than a princess. After the wedding, Charlene fulfilled her expected duties. She posed for photos, attended events, and offered polite smiles. But it all seemed rehearsed. Her expressions were stiff, her body language strained, and her public statements carefully measured. The fairy tale narrative continued, but the woman at its center was vanishing before our eyes. Eventually, her presence began to dwindle. At first, it was subtle, missed events, vague last-minute cancellations. The palace cited illness, exhaustion, or private matters. But as the excuses accumulated, public curiosity turned into concern. Where was Princess Charlene? And why did it seem like she didn't want to be seen? In 2014, Charlene gave birth to twins, Jacques and Gabriella. For most royals, the birth of heirs marks a joyous new chapter. But for Charlene, even motherhood didn't anchor her to palace life. Her public appearances remained sparse. When she was photographed with her children, she often appeared distant, fatigued, or simply going through the motions. The joy, the warmth, the emotional ease you'd expect from a mother seemed absent. She wasn't failing, she was just trying to fulfill expectations that had never been her own. Through it all, Charlene never lashed out publicly. She never broke protocol or revealed family secrets. She let her silence tell the story. And when she finally did speak, she didn't rewrite the past or deny the rumors. She simply said she had found peace, not happiness, not fulfillment, just peace. That quiet declaration confirmed what many had long suspected: this fairy tale had never belonged to her. It was a story written around her, projected onto her, and performed for the public, but never truly lived by her. That, perhaps, is the heart of the story, not one of rebellion or scandal, but of a woman who quietly disconnected from a life she never chose. Charlene did everything she was expected to do, yet never seemed to find herself in the role she was assigned. Over time, the palace kept up appearances, glossy photos, formal statements, and elegant galas. But beneath the surface, Charlene's true story unfolded, silently, subtly, persistently. Now, with the world finally paying attention, the narrative seems poised to shift. Because when a woman like Charlene starts to find her voice after years of suppression, what matters most isn't just what she says, it's what she does next. And that's exactly where this story is heading. Keep watching, because next, we'll explore how Prince Albert's past haunted Charlene before the wedding even began. To understand Princess Charlene's next move, we need to revisit her life with Prince Albert. Their story takes us back to the time of their wedding, a moment when the world turned its gaze to Monaco, expecting a royal fairy tale. But behind the palace walls, a quiet storm had already begun to stir. It hadn't yet reached the tabloids, but the signs were evident. In the final weeks leading up to the wedding, a story emerged that would change everything. A woman in Brazil made a startling claim: her daughter, born years earlier, was allegedly fathered by Prince Albert. The child was around 8 years old, which meant her conception overlapped with the early stages of Albert's relationship with Charlene. The news exploded like a grenade in a glass room, casting a shadow over what was supposed to be a fairy tale. This wasn't the first time Prince Albert had faced such controversy. He had already acknowledged fathering 2 other children, one in the United States and another in France. But for Charlene, this time was different. The scandal didn't belong to the distant past, it may have unfolded during the early days of their relationship. That possibility reframed everything. If true, Charlene hadn't simply fallen in love with a prince who had a complicated past. She was caught up in something still unfolding, something public, painful, and deeply personal. Speculation began to swirl. Had Charlene known about the Brazilian child before she accepted Albert's proposal? Had the palace concealed the truth from her? Or did she discover the story at the same time as the rest of the world, blindsided with no control over how it reached her? No one could say for certain. But around this time, her public demeanor changed. The light in her eyes faded. She became quieter, more reserved, as if bracing against a storm. Though she still smiled in public, the warmth no longer reached her eyes. Each step toward the altar seemed heavier than the last. The palace didn't remain silent. Albert's legal team responded quickly, issuing statements that dismissed the Brazilian claim as fabricated, an attempt to damage the prince's reputation. They offered no public DNA test or transparent investigation. The story didn't disappear entirely, but it was pushed out of sight. The emotional aftermath, however, couldn't be hidden. Whether or not the child was Albert's, the damage to Charlene was done. She was entering a marriage already weighed down by unresolved issues. And this wasn't a simple union, it was a role steeped in pressure and expectation. She had to embody perfection, become the future queen, raise the heir to the throne, and stand loyally beside her husband, even when things were far from fine. Observers began to realize Charlene wasn't just adapting to royal life, she was performing it. And the script she was handed didn't reflect her voice. Then came more troubling reports. French media suggested her passport had been confiscated to prevent her from leaving Monaco before the wedding. Rumors swirled that she had tried to flee multiple times but was stopped by palace staff. The palace labeled these claims absurd and exaggerated, but the speculation continued to spread. When the wedding finally took place, it dazzled on the surface, a lavish 3-day celebration filled with fashion, music, and aristocracy. But Charlene's tearful expression at the altar told a different story. These weren't joyful tears, they were frozen, painful. She looked like she wanted to vanish. Her face conveyed what words could not. What should have been a dream unfolded instead like a stage production, with Charlene cast in a heartbreaking lead role. The Brazilian child scandal quietly faded from public view. There were no follow-ups, no legal resolution, just silence. But Charlene never forgot. The public didn't forget either. It lingered like a ghost behind every photo and appearance. Over time, people began to see Charlene not as a princess living a dream, but as a woman caught in a nightmare she hadn't scripted. By then, the truth was becoming harder to conceal. Now, it appears that Princess Charlene may be planning an escape from Monaco. Based on her past behavior, it's likely she intends to break away from Prince Albert. In recent years, she has appeared at his side, playing her part, then, suddenly, disappeared. In 2021, she left Monaco for South Africa on what was meant to be a short charity trip. There were no major announcements, no apparent cause for concern. But as weeks turned to months, questions grew louder. Where was Charlene? Why wasn't she returning? The official explanation was that she had developed a serious ear, nose, and throat infection linked to a sinus graft. They claimed she was too unwell to fly. But the longer she stayed away, the less convincing the story seemed. What kind of sinus condition keeps a royal grounded for 6 months? And why did it arise just as tensions around her marriage resurfaced? By July, their 10th wedding anniversary, there should have been public celebration. A royal couple marking a decade together would usually release photos, give interviews, make a statement. But there was nothing. Charlene didn't return, and Albert seemed unsurprised. The milestone was quietly ignored, as though acknowledging it might raise more questions than answers. While Charlene remained absent, Albert appeared alone at events. He brought their twins, Jacques and Gabriella, along, a gentle buffer against public scrutiny. He repeated the same statement to the press: Charlene was recovering and would return soon. Yet his expression betrayed uncertainty. The more he insisted, the less sure he seemed. Occasionally, new photos of Charlene emerged. But they raised more concern. She looked thinner, her gaze distant. Though physically present, she appeared emotionally absent, a shadow in her own life. There was something raw and real about her transformation, something that couldn't be brushed aside. People noticed more than just her shorter hair, it was in the way she carried herself. Quieter. Dimmer. It didn't resemble recovery, it looked more like someone slowly vanishing. When Charlene returned to Monaco in November, many expected a triumphant homecoming. But that wasn't what they got. She didn't resume royal duties. She didn't appear at ceremonies or sit for interviews. Instead, she disappeared again within weeks. The palace offered a carefully crafted statement: she needed rest, time, privacy. But something didn't feel right. Whispers started to circulate, rumors about a facility in Switzerland. Not just any hospital, but an exclusive treatment center catering to emotional burnout, stress, and exhaustion, maybe all three. No official details ever emerged. No photos. No confirmed location. The palace only insisted she was safe and receiving care. Yet one question hung in the air: was this truly a health crisis, or her quiet escape? Public opinion divided. Some believed she was buckling under the relentless pressure, constant scrutiny, isolation, never-ending comparisons. Others saw something else: a woman finally walking away from a life she never truly chose. After all, disappearing for nearly a year doesn't happen unless something's deeply wrong, or unless someone's done pretending everything's fine. Then came a rare moment of royal honesty. Prince Albert broke from the usual script and admitted they were going through a difficult time. From someone in his position, it was as close to a confession as it gets. Suddenly, it wasn't just about health or duty, it was about them. Their marriage. Their future. And when Charlene eventually re-emerged, she was different, not just in looks, but in presence. Sharper. More guarded. The softness in her expression had given way to something tougher, maybe determination, maybe distance. Maybe both. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, but it held something steadier. A quiet strength. A signal that she wasn't just surviving, she was building boundaries. Even within the rigid framework of royal life. This wasn't the same woman who once stood silently beside Albert in couture gowns, swallowing back tears. This Charlene had changed. Just as people began adjusting to this new version of her, change was unfolding elsewhere, closer to home. Whispers hinted at shifts involving the children, the palace dynamic, even the future of Monaco itself. The question loomed: was Charlene preparing to leave the royal family? By 2022, Charlene had stopped blending in. The once muted royal silhouette was gone. In its place, a short, striking haircut that commanded attention. It wasn't just a fashion choice, it was a message. She wasn't dressing for public approval or royal protocol anymore. She was dressing for herself. And that change said everything. The clothes spoke volumes. No more soft pastels, flowy dresses, or nods to Grace Kelly. Instead, bold lines, strong tailoring, and unapologetic choices. She didn't dress for cameras, she dressed for power. Her outfits no longer sought validation. They were royal, they were personal. And through them, Charlene made it clear, she was done playing palace games. She still didn't speak publicly, not in interviews or statements, but her silence had shifted. It wasn't absence. It was intent. She made statements in the way she walked into a room without deferring to Albert, the way she stood in photos with a calm, unreadable expression. She didn't need to say anything, her presence, and sometimes her absence, said it all. She was no longer seeking to fit in. She had realized she didn't owe anyone anything. And when she did appear beside Albert, it no longer looked like a couple united, it looked like two professionals fulfilling obligations. No affection, no spark, just duty. Side by side, yet emotionally distant. It was unmistakable, the fairy tale had faded, replaced by something quieter, more contractual. Behind palace doors, insiders acknowledged the shift. Those close to the family spoke of a new Charlene, one who didn't attend every event out of obligation. One who said no. One who stopped letting others dictate her life. She began setting firm boundaries, fewer appearances, more time with her children, and less performance of the princess role. This wasn't coldness, it was clarity. Charlene wasn't shutting people out. She was protecting herself. From the pressure, the isolation, the heartbreak of constantly being treated like an outsider. This was someone who had faced the storm alone and emerged on her own terms. The fantasy was long gone, but in its place, something more authentic was beginning to form. The spotlight hadn't faded, but Charlene no longer danced in it. She showed up when it suited her. She withdrew when she needed space. She didn't perform. She didn't overshare. Her silence carried power now. A signal that though she remained part of the royal picture, she was no longer defined by it. And that was the real shift. People began seeing Charlene differently, not as the missing princess, but as someone who had been hidden in plain sight, now stepping fully into her truth. She wasn't escaping the palace. she was reshaping her role inside it. The world is watching now, waiting to see her next move. And when it comes, we'll be here to share it. Thank you for following along. What do you think Charlene is planning next? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel.